Hey, everybody, welcome to FL Teams. I'm Jeff Macolino. Joining me is Jeremiah Hensley. How are you, Jeremiah?
Doing well, my friend. Yourself?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you. We've got a little reprieve here from the normal. We don't have power rankings. We don't have a game to break down unless you want to really talk about flag football, AFC versus NFC. I think we'll pass on that. But
The skills competition's been kind of interesting, though.
yeah, I DVR'd it. I'll get to it eventually. Uh, don't spoil it for me though. Somebody in the comments is going to come in and ruin the whole thing because I'm really looking forward to watching it.
Yeah, no. Spoiler alert.
Um, yeah. Well, the big news, and it affects the state of Florida. The Forrest Gump of the National Football League, Tom Brady, has officially retired again. This time for real, presumably. Uh,
Yeah.
I think it's for real. He just needed to, come back one more year, go 8-10. You know,
Yeah, I think
it was worth a wife and family, right?
this year was the wave the white flag, man. It got ugly. And I was the guy. You called it all year, but I just kept waiting on him to catch fire. I just kept waiting on him to be Tom Brady, and there just wasn't anything left there, man. I mean, and you can't knock it. I mean, again, look, at the end of his career, the guy still leads the team into the playoffs, regardless of horrible record. And, it's a pretty amazing run. I may not be
Yeah.
done with him in Miami. I mean, chances are he's going to end up being a partial owner.
Yeah. Well, and look, I mean, to credit him, to take my foot off the Tom Brady hate for the gas pedal for a minute here. He had a bad supporting cast for the most part in Tampa this year. And look, he would have had a lot of people say with Brock Purdy maybe not available for next season. A lot of people were saying he might go to San Francisco. A lot of people were saying the Raiders wanted him, the Patriots wanted him, the Bucks did want him back. So I mean, credit, would he have done potentially worse than 8-9? Again, frankly, I don't blame him. I think if he was on a better team, he could have won more games, but he's gone. We don't have to talk about him. So all offseason, we can talk about Aaron Rodgers instead.
And try to figure out what the hell's going to go on in Tampa for quarterback.
Well, that is, in all seriousness, that is the big question to me is, already off the bat, there's some rumblings with Bucks fans and maybe we'll go after Derek Carr. To me, I think you've got some young pieces, but not a lot. I think you shed the veterans. I think you go young. I think you go with Kyle Trask if you like him. Maybe draft a quarterback also, depending on how much you like him. I say just, now the flip side of that is, look, the NFC South is weak as hell. It's up for grabs. And look, 9-8 will probably win the division this year again. I mean, 8-9 won it last year. I think I'm going to say 9-8 will probably win it because the Saints probably have the best roster. They don't have a quarterback currently. So that's a big question mark.
Yeah.
And they just they lost both of their co-defensive coordinators, although Dennis Allen calls the plays. The Panthers, we'll talk about them in a minute. They just hired a new coach, which generally doesn't lead to a massive turnaround. They also don't have a quarterback. The Falcons also really don't have a quarterback. I'm not putting I mean, Desmond Ritter, will they give him the shot at the start of the season? Maybe, but that's probably, I don't know if that's a good idea, frankly. So, I mean, look, if the Bucks do get a guy like Derek Carr, they're probably in discussion of being back in maybe winning the division again. And that's not to slight Tom Brady, but if they go all in and bring everyone back, but to me, it looks like there's a great opportunity to shed contracts like Leonard Fournette.
Yeah.
He looked old and bad. I'm not saying he's washed up because he's done this before in his career.
Yeah, he goes up, down, up, down, up, down. I mean, he'll end up somewhere next year and make an impact in a platoon. But yeah, I mean, from the skill position, they've really got to get younger. You can't be depending on guys like Julio Jones, right? And then we just know with Godwin and Evans, there's always a health concern and issue that's there. At some point, you got to take a step back to go forward. You can't just keep reloading. I mean, that's just not the way the NFL is situated anymore. And when you're Tampa, now's the best excuse of any, right? Is Brady walks away. Now just start to rebuild this and figure out what the franchise looks like for the next level.
Yeah. And frankly, I think if they have any questions about Todd Bowles, which I think would be very justifiable to have questions in him as a head coach, maybe rebuilding this year, letting the record slip a little bit and starting over with a new head coach next season might not be a bad way to go about kind of cleanly breaking things off, just from a no bad blood needs to happen. If they go 4-13, it's easy to say we're getting a new head coach. Bruce Arians, we're kicking him out of our advisor role because he's an asshat who lucked his way. Talk about Forrest Gumping your way into a Super Bowl.
No shit.
But hey, the Bucs are at a crossroads. We'll, of course, here at FL Teams, we will keep you updated. It'll be a little bit before we know what the Bucs do at quarterback, but obviously they're going to do something.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. And then of course Miami, as far as coordinators go, right? I mean, I think probably have made the biggest splash so far. There's been some sneaky under the radar coordinator changes though. Kellen Moore ended up going to the Chargers. I think that's a big one. Bill O'Brien getting back to the Patriots. But look, what Mike McDaniel has proven already is the ability to do what you look, how he even escapes my name now. Our previous head coach, what Flores couldn't do. Flores could never bring in coordinators. Flores could never bring in talent around him to do that. I mean, he was the debacle of the co-offensive coordinators and, keeping Boyer around, and he was kind of calling the D. So bringing in Vic Fangio, I think, is just a tremendous get for Miami. The defense obviously has talent. It has young talent. And with the right scheme in place and these guys getting to play together, I think the pieces are there for a Fangio style of defense. You've got some athletic safeties. You've got a couple of big guys in the middle that are holding ground, and Sealer and Wilkins. You've got Chubb now at the linebacker. And a lot of, surprises that we found on defense coming out with, Nick Needham was out all year, who had already been a surprise, but then Kader Kohu coming through undrafted and playing in that position where, we know we've got a nickel back at the very least, if not a guy starting on the other side. So I think it was a little weird though. Fangio still hasn't technically signed his deal. So even though it was reported over the last weekend that Fangio had said that he accepted the job, well, then as soon as your boy Peyton ends up in Denver, it's all back on the news again that they're reaching out to Fangio, and everybody's still underneath it, where it was is he just going to give a verbal in the media and then walk away from this thing? But apparently they have the absolute solid, no signature until after the Super Bowl, which again, I don't know why he wouldn't. He's going to be the highest paid defensive coordinator in the entire league. So, I mean, I think for Miami, it's a huge get, and hopefully that's going to start solidify that side of the ball. And, with McDaniel and what they're doing on the offensive side, I mean, who knows, man? We talked a little bit about Buffalo and the problems that they're going to face cap-wise and the ability that they have. This is an opportunity for Miami to make some moves. So I'm really happy to see Fangio come in. It's a hell of an upgrade over Boyer.
Yeah. I think he's a proven coach, great hire. And yeah, there were reports going back to December that Sean Payton was lining him up to be his defensive coordinator. So It was interesting for a little bit to me when Fangio was announced as picking the Dolphins, because I'm like, I thought he had an agreement with Payton that they were going together.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think Fangio, he was Denver's head coach, and it's really awkward to bring a guy back under those circumstances as a coordinator, especially it's only been a couple of years. It's pretty fresh, fresh firing. So I don't know. Now there is new ownership in Denver. But it makes more sense going to Miami, and Vic Fangio, of course, was a linebackers coach for the Saints back in the Dome Patrol days, the best linebacking corps in the history of football. So
they were animals.
Yeah, they were. Speaking of animals, let's talk about some zebras. Because, I mean, that's taken over Twitter. Like my segue there?
Dude, it was bad.
NFL rigged was trending on Twitter for quite a while. I'm going to be honest, and I'll speak slow in case any Philadelphia fans are watching. But the first game I'm watching, and San Francisco goes down to Josh Johnson, a journeyman fourth-string quarterback, who later got injured, and Brock Purdy with a torn UCL had to come back in the game. So they had someone who could kind of throw the ball. That game was over early, but the Eagles in the second quarter, they got a lot of calls, and individually it's like, I guess maybe, but it's one of those things that calls just time after time. They got 3 or 4 first downs on the drive that made it 14-7 after McCaffrey tied the game up. Just keep getting them across the field, and Shanahan was losing his mind on the San Francisco sideline, and justifiably so, because at a certain point, it's just a snowball that becomes an avalanche. Now, look, if the league's rigged, at least the refs in that game did it early in the game. People say, oh, the refs were horrible, but it was a blowout. Well, of course it was a blowout. When you're not going to win a game in the second quarter because every call is going one team's way, and you lost your quarterback, it's very easy to let things snowball out of control. The much more visible issue was certainly in Kansas City with the Bengals and the Chiefs, giving them an extra down, which was absurd. The only call I would say that was clear and obvious was unfortunately the penalty that set up the field goal. Otherwise, that game probably almost certainly is going into overtime. They're not kicking a 60-yard field goal. So they'd have one more play with 8 seconds to try to get a few more yards. And I mean, Butker wasn't kicking them long in that direction. So, I mean, the odds were decent, and I feel terrible for the Bengals player who committed the penalty. However, a lot of replays on Twitter point out, boy, they missed a holding penalty or 2 on the Chiefs offensive line to let Mahomes break out of the pocket to begin with. So it's just one of those things that, again, there was a very bad pass interference call. They gave the Chiefs an extra down. I really didn't like they didn't call a roughing the passer that should have been called when Burrow got knocked over. I didn't like the intentional grounding call. Pete Ryan was 5 yards away from the ball. Was he trying to throw it to him? No, but they always give that to the quarterback. I don't understand why this situation, the officials decided they had to jump in, which is fundamentally my problem with officiating to begin with. Is no one pays a ticket and say, boy, I hope the refs play great tonight. Right. They hope they don't hear or see those assholes one time the whole game. And I don't know whether it's ego, whether it is the NFL being rigged, or at least having their favorites that they tell the officials, we want this team to advance. I certainly think in 2018 that happened when it came to a new Los Angeles team going to the Super Bowl over another small market team. I just went off on a tangent. I don't have my tinfoil hat.
it was really bad. I mean, as I was watching in the fourth quarter and everything's getting back tied, there were like back-to-back plays where, you see it's like 3rd and 13, and I watch the play and it's an incomplete pass, and you're like, all right, well, they're going to punt it away. And then I come back and it's like 1st down, and I'm like, well, what the hell did they just call, right? And I mean, and the point being, if you watch NFL the way that you and I do, and most fans that go through this, we do understand and know that you can call a penalty pretty much on every play. I mean, there's something to be called, right? But I do feel like there used to be more of a focus on when you got into the playoffs, let them play, right? Let them play. There was going to be a little bit of hand checking. There was going to be, some things that were just going to be allowed in the game, right? I mean, that weren't just blatant. And these were like small, minor things at huge times. And I mean, okay. the roughing or the late hit, unfortunately, it's the right call. But
Yeah.
even that was, close enough to the point where the guy didn't lay his shoulder into him. There's just so many different things of a way that you can affect the outcome of a game there. And in that game, it was just pretty blatant, man. That was really bad. Cincinnati, you just wonder again, this all goes back to, there's a chance that game could have been in Cincinnati, right? And that goes back to, the cancellation of the game and not rescheduling with Buffalo on who's going to get home field and who's not. You end up going into Kansas City, all the things going, and there's just too many stories here. If you want to put the tinfoil hat on, it's way too easy to do this time, right? It's Andy Reid versus the Eagles. It's the Kelsey brothers. It's the two African-American quarterbacks facing each other for the first time in the Super Bowl, right? There's a lot of stories that are there for this game that don't make you stretch too far when you got to put that hat on to say, could there have been other things at play?
Yeah. Well, and it's so it's funny, and I know we have talked about it. I don't know if I've really gone into it on here. My whole thing going back to when the Niners were 4-4 and declared the best team in the NFL on every network. And I said, you watch, the NFL has something up. And in a lot of games, the 49ers got some calls. And I'm like, that's the team the NFL want. They just let the media know, start pumping them up now. I don't care that they're 500. These are our boys. And I messaged you and Isaac in the second quarter of that game and said, guess I was wrong. They clearly want the Eagles to win this game.
Well, that if we don't look at the officiating part of it, I just don't care who you are. There's a certain level of luck that's involved in getting through an NFL season and getting into the playoffs, getting into the Super Bowl. And, that hit on Brock Purdy, that kind of sealed the game right there, and maybe I was one of those, and there were other people that maybe didn't give Brock Purdy the credit that he was getting, because you see Shanahan create an offense that Jimmy G looks good in. Everybody looks good in, every quarterback, right? But it was pretty obvious the step down when Josh Johnson came in of what you were playing with, and that was going to be an uphill battle regardless. And
Josh Johnson's kind of you know how in baseball, the wins above replacement player. Josh Johnson's like the perfect replacement player to show like, oh, okay, Shanahan's a genius, but you do need a certain level of ability.
Right. There has to be at least mediocrity.
Yeah, Jimmy G is a top 20 NFL quarterback, right? Maybe Brock Purdy is too. And I, initially they said 6 months, and then I saw a report recently, and I haven't followed up on it, but I saw that it might be a whole year because he needs Tommy John surgery.
Okay. Well, dude, if you're Trey Lance, you're hoping. You don't want to see, but all of a sudden, the name that's gotten forgotten in San Francisco is Trey Lance.
Yeah, and
he was
presumably is going to have the front runner to get the job, even if he's out 6 months.
Yeah,
he's going to be coming back in the beginning of preseason. So Trey Lance is going to get all the reps with the ones, and I would assume if 6 months, that probably means that's when he can start throwing again, not when he can play football. So I assume we're going to see Trey Lance under center week 1, which frankly takes out a possible quarterback trade that I thought was I thought Trey Lance might be a guy on the move. And look, maybe the NFL sent a message, ever since the refs started wearing these earpieces, maybe say, hey, we don't want Josh Johnson versus Pat Mahomes in the Super. We don't want Josh Johnson to be a starting quarterback in the Super Bowl.
Right.
Get us Jalen Hurts.
Yeah. Well, and look, momentum, man. Home field advantage. Philly's a tough place to play. The fans are absolutely insane. They take pride in the reputation that they've built and they've earned. And, you get a break like that, and then you catch a couple more to get that drive go up 14-7 to put it back after McCaffrey scores. And like you said, it just a snowball becomes an avalanche. And that can happen really quickly in the NFL. And, Philly, to their credit, Sirianno and the guys, they went for the jugular. When they saw an opportunity, they didn't let up. They went after this. I thought the defense for San Francisco would still keep it closer than the 31-7.
I think they got pretty pretty depleted with some of the penalty calls.
Yeah.
That look, again, pointing back to they got away with quite a bit on defense throughout the season that probably should have been called. So when it's I think back to the Seahawks, the Legion of Boom, and they held on every play, and the refs aren't going to throw the flag every play. They penalized them a lot, but they're going to let them get away with it 95% of the time. And I do remember one game they did flag after flag after flag, and it was like they didn't know what to do, that they were actually calling all their penalties.
Right. You can't change your strategy at that point. You're still just going to play bump.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, they weren't letting guys off the line. That secondary was just bump and grind, man. And you're right. It's a shame that the refs become a story this far into the playoffs. I mean, every now and then you see one or two things, but this seemed pretty egregious. And you just hope that it's kind of cleared up before the Super Bowl, and that it doesn't come down to how it's officiated on how this game ends up.
God, it is such malpractice by a multi-billion-dollar business to have part-time geriatrics who are half blind and fully stupid and possibly crooked out there destroying the product of the greatest athletes in the world. It's grotesque.
I don't
That they allow
understand how
this to
this is
happen
still in
year
place.
after year.
I mean, do you think maybe that's something that comes out of this conversation, right? Getting to full-time refs I don't understand how it's not something that's already on the table. These shouldn't be guys who are, postmen in the off season and then all of a sudden come out and dictate again the highest grossing, most popular sport in all of the United States, the world, maybe. I mean, the other football may argue, but and you're having it being controlled by guys who are part-time. It doesn't make sense.
Well, again, tinfoil hat part of me thinks, well, they want it that way because they can always get the result they want and just say, look, we're doing our best. The officials make mistakes. It didn't happen after 2018. They did the 1 year where they reviewed pass interference, which didn't work because they didn't really do it properly.
Well, the key word comes down to what? It has to be indisputable, right?
Yeah.
And I've yet to see a pass interference, maybe one or two pass interference calls in a season that aren't disputable. I mean, it's a judgment call. I mean,
nobody in the NFL knows what a catch is. How are they going to define what pass interference is?
Yeah.
I mean, let's get real here.
Yeah.
Speaking of going for an awkward segue, but I don't have one. Not a lot of head coaching vacancies this offseason, really. Only 5.
Yeah.
Colts, Cardinals still looking. Seems like they're kind of getting a little desperate and afraid, especially the Colts, who are talking about doing a 3rd round of interviews. The big fish is off the board, that being Sean Payton going to the Denver Broncos. I do think that was maybe holding up a couple of these teams.
Mm-hmm.
Frank Reich, who was the Panthers' first quarterback,
Yep.
now their head coach. I like that hire. Sean Payton traded to the Broncos for a 1st-round pick that the Dolphins sent from the 49ers. That pick's gotten around a lot. It might go again. Don't be surprised.
Right?
It might still have a couple of dance partners out there. And the Houston got D'Amico Ryans from the 49ers. We'll see if that impacts the Niners defense next year because he did an excellent job and he was in high demand. So 3 filled, 2 pending. I think, honestly, the 3 best candidates have jobs. So I'm curious what the Colts and Cardinals do. But out of the 3 that were hired, I mean, what I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. What grades do you give those 3 hires?
Sean Payton is an A. I mean, if anybody's going to be able to come in and resurrect Russell Wilson, it's going to be Sean Payton. There are certain limits and liabilities with Russell Wilson that compare a lot to what people used to call limits and liabilities with Drew Brees. He's used to a quarterback of that stature with that same sort of skill set. I think he can turn that around. I think it's a good opportunity for him to do that. D'Amico Ryans, I love going back to Houston. I think Houston has needed to do this. I mean, let's be honest. Brian Flores is the reason that they hired Lovie Smith. That's just, they didn't want Lovie Smith. They wanted to do something young. They wanted to give a first-time head coach an opportunity with this franchise, which it needs, because Houston's still got a lot of young talent and a lot of picks.
Yeah, they got 2 and 12.
Yeah, I mean, they can build something special there with the right group of people leading the way. So I like D'Amico Ryans going back there. Frank Reich, I think, he showed what he could do in Indianapolis. I think it's funny that his big knock in Indy was he never had the quarterback, and now he's walking straight into Carolina with no quarterback. I mean, so he's kind of walking into a very similar situation. But I mean, I think as far as who's out there and who's available, I think these are the best hires you could make. I'm kind of wondering if Indy isn't really going to try to justify Jeff Saturday. Not that he did a fantastic job when he came in through this, but for a guy that just jumped in on the spot to take over the way he did, I think in order to, in the post-Flores world, right, where everything is going to be, did you follow all the procedures and check every box? You almost wonder if Indy isn't dragging this and moving through it so that if and when they make the decision to go with Saturday, they can have the backing of, we really went through everything and we vetted everybody and we did everything we could possibly do, and this is our guy. And speaking of Flores, again, I'm just wondering, if he's still got his attorneys on retainer. I mean, I know he interviewed for 1 or 2 jobs and he hasn't got hired yet. So, outside of D'Amico Ryans, we haven't had a minority hire in this group. But Flores is still on the table, I think, for Arizona. They've interviewed him, and but
my assumption is I mean, I wouldn't be surprised to see him get interviewed for like the Saints defensive coordinator job, even.
Sure.
I mean, he'll probably get some DC looks if he doesn't get a head coaching job. I agree with you. I think the 3 coaches that were hired were best possible scenarios in all 3 cases. Yeah. I mean, I think D'Amico Ryans is exactly what Houston needs. I think Sean Payton is probably exactly what Russell Wilson needs. I think he can change the offense to a manner that caters to what Russell Wilson does well.
Absolutely.
I'm curious whether he's going to trade for Taysom Hill as some insurance because, he
loves some Taysom.
Frank Reich, I think he'll succeed if they figure out what they're going to do at quarterback. It's a big if. And a lot of the mocks have one of the top 3 quarterbacks, not Bryce Young, but either Stroud or Levis, whatever, falling 2-9 to Carolina. That's not going to happen. They're going to have to trade up if they want one of those 3 guys. There's always they've got a good defense, and there's always a possibility they go out and try to splurge on an Aaron Rodgers or Derek Carr.
Jimmy G stopgap. I mean, you still got, we don't really know anything about Matt Corral. I mean, at this point, right? I mean, they drafted him and he kind of sat behind everything. I think when we're looking at the coaching changes this year, it's so much different because I think a lot of people expose the flaws that can happen last year, right? There were some really bad hires last year. And the one that's going to go to mind is going to be Nathaniel Hackett, right? And Hackett landed really quickly back with the Jets as an offensive coordinator. But you start realizing that, for every guy like McDaniel who comes in and can make an impact like this, you also have like stepping outside of this coaching tree, depending on how much leniency you're going to have. I would say the Colts one surprises me because I think the Colts have a roster that a good coach can do something with. I think Arizona's a dumpster fire. I think Arizona's been a dumpster fire. My thoughts on Kyler Murray. I've just never been sold on what he is. I think we've seen the cap of everything he was going to be, and it's only going to go down from there. You're talking about James Conner in the backfield. What do you really have as weapons there? He's not getting younger. On the defensive side, J.J. Watt, I mean, is Watt gone now? Is he? So he's gone. So it's like Arizona, that cupboard's pretty bare. I mean, there's not a lot of excitement walking into Arizona at like the toys and the tools and the stuff that you have. At least going into Indy, you've got, the Jonathan Taylor, you've got, an offensive line that's backed up. You've got Pittman, you've got some stuff on defense. I think whoever goes to Arizona, that's going to be an uphill battle. And not to mention, I mean, they're in a hell of a division.
Yeah, and they're tied to Murray. I mean, they're stuck with him.
Yeah,
and frankly, I don't know if Sean Payton wanted that job. No, nobody's really going to ever know the story as far as who wanted Payton or where he wanted to go. He interviewed everywhere.
Right.
He's the one coach who I think he'll get Murray shipped up into shape, or he's not going to play. I mean,
right.
He was Sean Payton was spoiled by having a guy like Drew Brees with the work ethic and all that. And their relationship's well documented, sitting for hours the night before the game, laying out the game plan, the call sheet. Kyler Murray, you can't half-ass playing quarterback under Sean Payton. It's
right.
Not going to work.
And you are like, he's got that franchise hostage. I mean, it is that there's so much money tied into Kyler Murray. There's nothing else that's coming behind that. Like, you've got to come in and own that. And it was a detriment. It's one of the reasons that the Dolphins ended up hiring Mike McDaniel is, they had talked to people last year, and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, had they pulled off the tampering with Sean Payton coming in, Tua would not have been the quarterback last year.
No.
Guys weren't happy to be tied to Tua. It's the reason that, Peyton was already bringing Brady in. And so when you come into a franchise where they're basically saying like, look, this is our guy, we've hitched our wagon. Now you got to make it work. That's tough, man.
Yeah. And look, two of the teams, Cardinals and Broncos, they're tied to their quarterback. No one's going to take that contract off your hands, and I don't think they can even afford to trade him with all the guarantees. They take a massive dead hit on the cap. I thought both of those teams, to me, I'm like, these two teams should be fighting and clawing to get Peyton, because he'll make it work. I can't see him not making it work, at least somewhat. Better than what it was with Russell Wilson or with Kyler Murray.
I think in Denver, man, he's gonna make an impact quick. I mean, that offense is talented. There's playmakers, right? I mean, when Russell was the guy holding you back, and I do think, again, there was a big hit on what happened with Denver this year was Javonte Williams going down. I still think Javonte Williams is going to end up being one of the best backs out of that class. I mean, I think he was ready for a breakout season. So having Javonte Williams,
and then Melvin Gordon,
right?
Yeah, Gordon just turned to shit.
Well, you knew what you had at that point.
Didn't help.
So I mean, you're going to have that back on board with Javonte Williams. You've got some talent at the wide receiver position, and the defense, they're set up as well. So I think Peyton's in the best situation for him to succeed. I think this was probably the best spot for him to go into, because out of all those quarterback situations, the most proven one is Russell Wilson. I mean, he had a shit year, but I mean, this is a Super Bowl winning quarterback who's obviously got talent and has shown that, right? So the most proven quarterback that was available for you to go coach is in Denver.
Yeah, you could argue, I mean, I guess you could throw Mahomes in the mix, but outside of Aaron Rodgers, now that Brady's, you could argue he is the most proven quarterback in the NFL.
Right.
You certainly could argue that before last year. Hi, Isaac. You gotta wave from the master on YouTube.
From the young goat.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, dude, so I think it's going to be interesting to see how those pan out. And you know what? I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think next week we're going to try to get in maybe 2 shows, do some props, and then do a game breakdown as well. And so it's always fun. This is a nice little off-season part. I think you will enjoy the skills competition, man. It's actually, some of the stuff that I saw was actually pretty entertaining. I'll take it over the sand
Two-hand touch
ball.
game.
Yeah, and all that other good stuff. So it's not a
Yeah.
spoiler alert, but Derek Carr had probably the line of the whole weekend. It was fantastic.
Oh, I can't wait. Did he wear a Raiders hat?
No.
Okay,
But
I
with
was
it
going to
being
say, if
in
I was
Vegas,
him, I'd be like, just give me like the Rob Lowe, just NFL hat, just the
yeah,
plain.
well, with it being in Vegas, it'll, I can't help but
Ooh.
give a spoiler alert because I was watching it. So the skills competition being there, they're like, you've thrown a lot of touchdowns in Vegas, but have you ever been on a roll like that? Have you ever been that hot? And he goes, no, I don't think I have. If I was, I probably wouldn't be playing somewhere new next year.
I don't know how. By the way, the AFC quarterbacks going to the Pro Bowl.
Yeah.
Tyler Huntley, my God.
Right. Which, dude, that's going to be fun in the offseason. That's going to be a whole nother mess of stuff because we got to see how that Lamar Jackson thing shakes out because I think Baltimore got okay with Tyler Huntley, like to the point where I don't know that anybody's going to cough up huge money for Lamar Jackson. He's becoming very Randall Cunningham-esque in that there's a ton of talent there, but what does the guy want?
Yeah, it'll be an interesting quarterback offseason.
Yeah.
Like it was last offseason.
Rodgers and Jimmy G and even Baker Mayfield. I'd love to look. I'm going on record right now stating it. I'd love to see Baker Mayfield come down to Miami. I'd be more than happy to get him as a backup.
I think the young kids call it shipping.
Yeah,
like relationship. I'm shipping, assuming Jameis Winston is released by the Saints. I want him to go to Miami to back up to. I just want to see him let loose with those speedsters on that team, man. Just air it out, man.
What we need is somebody who can step in on short notice and can keep you competitive, right? I mean, I didn't dislike Skylar Thompson. I think Skylar played really as good as you could hope for him to play, in those last couple of games. But having a guy like Baker Mayfield, who's been in the league long enough, or even Jameis Winston, who's come in and has just enough raw ability to go out and keep you competitive for a couple of games, right? Because, the Bridgewater, the Brissett, that stuff hasn't worked for us, man. We need a guy who's just going to be an impact person. That's it.
Yeah, no, I'm rooting for Jameis to end up in Miami. I think he can make some fun, at least some fun highlight reel deep bombs to Tyreek and Waddle.
I wouldn't hate it, but yeah, this is going to be a fun little off season for quarterbacks. There's going to be a lot of movement and some interesting things going on. So, not the least of which is going to be your boys down in New Orleans, man. I mean, to see what really happens there.
I'm on the Taysom Hill train.
Yeah, I don't see Andy Dalton's not your answer. So,
unfortunately, he might be, but not my answer.
and then figuring out what's going to happen with Geno Smith. Is somebody going to see this 1 year of Geno Smith that he played really well, and is he going to be one of those guys that parlays this into a big money deal somewhere? There's going to be some interesting plays. See what kind of shakes out.
Yeah. Well, before we do that, all that stuff shakes out. We do have the Super Bowl next week. Like you mentioned, we're going to have the prop show. We need to implement some punishments and some prizes in that game this year.
I like it.
We need to have some accountability for our mistakes. And we're going to preview the Super Bowl. And don't worry if you're a mouth-breathing moron asshole from a certain city in Pennsylvania. We'll talk real slow and use a lot of monosyllabic words for you.
Dude,
make sure you subscribe to FL Teams where we cover Florida sports, not sports in Philadelphia. I'm craving a cheesesteak, though.
Hey, Philly's had a good sports year, man, from everything that they had, the Sixers making their little run, and then the Phillies World Series, and now,
You're going to get the ball just short in another sport. Oh,
they do this over and over again, though. It's a cursed little city. So I'll give you on the ground reporting from that when it happens.
Yeah, I'll give you a preview of the Sunday night news after the Super Bowl. Win or lose, Philadelphia will burn.
Yeah. They look to the point where it's like, look, they grease the poles now before the games even start. Any championship game, they'll grease the light poles to keep people off of it. And it just becomes like a carnival game. Now they know it's going to be greased, but now it's how am I going to get to the top of it? And they still climb it. and they still scurry up it, tearing off what last week was a couple of bus stops where they were just standing on top in downtown for whatever. And it's like pure celebration until it completely collapses and 15 people fall on each other.
Is there something in the water in Philadelphia that lowers IQ significantly, or
what it is,
I feel like the medulla oblongata gets all jacked up in Philadelphia?
It is a town that has absolutely embraced what the country thought that it was, right? And
being mouth-breathing moron assholes.
Right. And so now they have a reputation to live up to, right? And also, now I'll tell you, for the most part, the true Philadelphia fans that I've met and I've dealt with here, they're not the crazy assholes who are destroying the city. What you have is you have a lot of South Jersey and fringe people that are just looking for a reason to get crazy. And that gives them a reason.
So like most of those people
probably don't even know what the score of the game was. They just have a reason to go out on the streets and get drunk in public and start tearing shit up.
I mean, I like the drunken public stuff, but the other part just,
Yeah. They've embraced it. It's like now it's a badge of honor. It's like it has to be earned.
Well, send the short buses to Philly. They're going to earn it a lot, win or lose. But we'll be here to preview the game. Boy, I wonder which team I'm going to pull for.
Yeah, let's see. The Andy Reid Bowl, the Kelsey brothers, all kinds of goodness.
All kinds of goodness. And make sure you're subscribed to FL Teams on YouTube. Follow on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. And we'll have at least a couple shows coming to you next week. And we also have podcasts and all this other fun content. So go to flteams.com. Jeremiah, we'll see you next week.
Can't wait.
We out.